The curtains remained drawn, shrouding the room in a perpetual twilight. The once vibrant space now felt like a forgotten relic, a place where time stood still. Dust motes danced in the thin slivers of light that dared to penetrate the gloom. They floated aimlessly, much like the thoughts that swirled in Alex's mind, each one a fleeting reminder of a world outside his reach. An overflowing ashtray rested on the coffee table, a testament to sleepless nights and a constant companion. The cigarettes had become a crutch, a way to pass the endless hours that stretched before him. Alex lay on the couch, his face turned away from the empty apartment. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that raged within him. He hadn't showered in days. The thought of facing the world, even for a moment, was too overwhelming. His hair was a mess and his clothes were wrinkled and stained. Each day he sank deeper into the mire of his own despair, unable to muster the energy to care. The world outside seemed distant, a million miles away. The bustling city, once a source of excitement and opportunity, now felt like a foreign land. Here, in this self-imposed exile, he felt safe from the judgment of others, yet utterly lost within himself. The isolation was both a refuge and a prison, a place where he could hide from the world but not from his own thoughts. Days blurred into one another, each one indistinguishable from the last. The passage of time had become a cruel joke, a relentless march that offered no respite. Time had lost all meaning, a meaningless construct in the face of his all-consuming despair. Minutes felt like hours, and hours like days, each one dragging him further into the abyss. He felt like a ghost, a shadow of his former self, drifting aimlessly through life. The person he once was seemed like a distant memory, a stranger he could no longer recognize.
Why bother? The words echoed in the empty room, a question with no answer.
The simplest of tasks, once taken for granted, now seemed insurmountable. The clutter around him was a physical manifestation of the chaos in his mind. Getting out of bed in the morning was a Herculean effort, a battle he fought and lost more often than not. Showering an ordeal he could barely muster the energy for. Eating was a chore, sleep an elusive escape. The basic necessities of life had become monumental challenges. His phone lay on the floor, its screen dark and lifeless. It was a silent witness to his descent, a connection to a world he could no longer face. He couldn't remember the last time he'd checked it, couldn't bear to face the concerned messages and missed calls that he knew awaited him. Each missed call was a reminder of the life he was letting slip away.
I can't do this! The words were a plea, a cry for help that went unheard.
He had withdrawn from everyone and everything he once held dear, seeking solace in the cold embrace of isolation. The walls of his apartment had become his only companions, silent witnesses to his suffering. His friends had tried to reach out at first, but he had pushed them away, unable to explain the darkness that had enveloped him. Their concern was a burden he couldn't bear, their attempts to help only deepening his sense of isolation. How could he possibly articulate the depths of his despair? The crushing weight that pressed down upon him, threatening to suffocate him? Words seemed inadequate. Unable to capture the true extent of his suffering, he felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of despair with no lifeline in sight. The world around him continued to turn, indifferent to his pain. The world seemed to move on without him, its vibrant colours muted, its joyous sounds muffled by the suffocating blanket of his depression. The laughter of children, the chatter of passers-by, all seemed like distant echoes of a life he could no longer touch. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own mind, with no escape in sight. The walls of his mind closed in around him, a labyrinth of despair with no exit. A sharp rap on the door startled Alex, jolting him from his stupor. The sound echoed through the quiet room, breaking the silence that had enveloped him for hours. He flinched, his heart pounding in his chest. Who could it be? His mind raced through the possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. He wasn't expecting anyone, didn't want to see anyone. The isolation had become his comfort, a shield against the world outside. He considered ignoring it, hoping whoever it was would simply go away. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. But the knocking persisted, insistent, demanding to be acknowledged. Each knock seemed to grow louder, more urgent, as if the visitor knew he was inside.
Not now, not today.
Reluctantly, he rose from the couch, his limbs heavy and uncooperative. The weight of his thoughts made every movement a struggle. He shuffled to the door, each step an effort. The distance seemed to stretch, the door a daunting destination. He peered through the peephole, his heart sinking when he saw Mia standing on the other side. Her face was etched with concern, a mirror of his own turmoil. Mia, his oldest friend, the one person who had always seen the best in him, even when he couldn't see it himself. Memories of their shared laughter and support flooded his mind. He couldn't avoid her forever. The thought of facing her was daunting, but the thought of losing her was unbearable.
Mia,
Alex, can I come in? Her voice was gentle yet filled with a plea that tugged at his heart.
He hesitated for a moment, torn between the desire to shut her out and the longing for human connection. The internal battle raged within him. The latter won out, and he stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The act felt monumental, a small victory against his isolation.
what are you doing here? His voice was a mix of surprise and relief.
I was worried about you. Her eyes searched his face, looking for signs of the friend she knew. You haven't been answering my calls or texts. The evidence of her concern was clear, a digital trail of her attempts to reach him.
I'm sorry, I can't. His words were heavy with unspoken pain.
Mia stepped closer, her expression softening with empathy. She reached out, her presence a balm to his troubled soul.
Can't what? Her question was simple, yet it carried the weight of her concern.
I don't know. His voice trailed off, the words he needed eluding him. I don't feel like myself. The admission hung in the air, a stark reflection of his inner turmoil.
Mia's visit chipped away at the wall of isolation Alex had so carefully constructed around himself. It was a wall built brick by brick, each one representing a moment of pain, a betrayal, or a disappointment. He had convinced himself that this fortress was necessary, that it was the only way to protect his fragile heart from further harm. Her concern, her genuine worry, planted a seed of doubt in his mind. It was a small seed, almost imperceptible at first, but it began to grow slowly and steadily, challenging the beliefs he had held on to for so long. Could he really continue like this, shutting himself off from the world, pushing away the people who cared about him? The question gnawed at him, refusing to be silenced. He thought about the family photo on his bedside table, a reminder of happier times, of connections that once brought him joy. He retreated to his journal, a worn leather-bound volume that had become his confidant, the repository of his darkest thoughts and fears. It was a place where he could be honest, where he could pour out his soul without fear of judgment. The pages were filled with a jumble of words, a testament to his inner turmoil. Each entry was a snapshot of his pain, a record of his struggle to make sense of his emotions. He reread his entries, each one a painful reminder of his descent into despair. The words seemed to mock him, a cruel reflection of his darkest moments.
I'm so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending, tired of wearing a mask that hid his true feelings, tired of being a burden to everyone. The words were scrawled across the page, a raw and unfiltered expression of his deepest fears.
He closed his eyes, the words echoing in his mind. Was he a burden? The question lingered, a shadow that darkened his thoughts. He'd never thought of himself that way before. But now the thought wormed its way into his consciousness, taking root and threatening to choke out any remaining hope. It was a new kind of pain, one that he wasn't sure he could endure. He thought about Mia's visit, her unwavering concern. She had looked at him with such compassion, such understanding, that it had almost broken through his defenses. She didn't seem to think he was a burden. She cared. She wanted to help. Her kindness was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in his otherwise dark world. But how could he let her? How could he allow himself to be vulnerable, to expose the depths of his pain to someone else? How could he possibly expose his brokenness to her, to anyone? The thought of revealing his true self, of showing the cracks in his facade, was terrifying. The thought of opening up to someone, of sharing the darkness that consumed him, filled him with a mixture of terror and longing. He wanted to be understood, to be seen, but the fear of judgment, of rejection, was paralyzing. He craved connection, craved understanding, but the fear of judgment, of rejection, held him captive. It was a cruel irony to want something so desperately and yet be so afraid of it. He was trapped in a vicious cycle, his own worst enemy. The walls he had built to protect himself had become his prison, and he didn't know how to break free. He knew he couldn't continue like this, but the thought of taking that first step, of reaching out for help, seemed insurmountable. It was a leap of faith, one that required more courage than he felt he had. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over Mia's contact. The urge to call her, to hear her voice, was strong, but so was the fear of what might happen if he did. He put the phone down, the weight of his indecision pressing down on him. He felt defeated, trapped by his own fears and insecurities. But as he looked out the window, the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find the strength to take that first step. Maybe he could find a way to break free from the prison of his own making. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but he knew he had to try, for himself and for the people who cared about him. It was time to start tearing down the walls, one brick at a time. With a newfound sense of determination, he took the first step on the path to healing. It was a journey that would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face it. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope, a whisper of possibility.